So welcome to this new edition of our Brain Talks, our podcast series in the context of the Brain Innovation Days. We aim at really bring together key opinion leaders and stakeholders from the brain innovation ecosystem to create synergies and showcase the importance of brain innovation. It is and how brain innovation is changing Europe and the world. In today's talk, we take a closer look at the driving force behind the Brain Innovation Days, brain disorders themselves, and the immense burden they place on society. In particular, we are going to look at neurological conditions, and I'm pleased to welcome Professor Günther Deuschl, the past president of the European Academy of Neurology. I will be your moderator today. My name is Frédéric Destrebec. I'm the executive director of the European Brain Council, which is a founding partner of the Brain Innovation Days. So, Günther, I'm really pleased to open the conversation with you today. Maybe as a starter, I'd like to invite you to introduce the European Academy of Neurology and what its mission is.
Hello, thank you, Fred. It's a pleasure to be here today, and certainly I think the topic that you have chosen for today's podcast is a very good one. The burden of neurological diseases is a great concern, and the European Academy of Neurology, the association of all neurologists in Europe, is certainly the workforce that is dealing a lot with this kind of problem. In total, we have 45,000 members all over Europe, and these 45,000 members are part of the 84,000 neurologists that we have in Europe. And these 84,000 neurologists serve 900 million citizens all across Europe. The European Academy has a broad program of activities. The different tasks that we follow is to foster science, certainly. This is one of the main issues, and research is something that particularly neurology needs. We have education as one of our main goals, and the education is mainly directed at our 45,000 members. But certainly we are also working on making patient guidelines, patient guides for the different fields. One of the many purposes of this society is also to define what is needed in neurology, because we have an overview how you can treat diseases. Out of this we construct guidelines, and these guidelines should then be applied by neurologists and should be accepted by the governments to provide appropriate funding for treating the patients. So these are all parts of what we do. And overall, the idea is really also to be a home for the neurologists in Europe, and to advance high quality patient care, which is the ultimate goal of our society.
All right, but in this context then, how does the burden of neurological disease come into play, and what did the EAN do in order to try and evaluate this or try and capture, let's say, the magnitude of this burden?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is the topic of today's talk. The burden of neurological diseases is certainly a precondition that we can work in the field. If we don't know how this burden looks like, how it's geographically distributed, what the needs are in the western part and in the eastern part of Europe, without all of this, we are really lost in the field. This was the motivation why we started a project which we call the European Burden of Disease Project of the EAN, where we simply try to understand how prevalent diseases are, how much of a burden they impose on the society, and that was done in a research project together with the leading epidemiological institution in the world, which is a Seattle Institute, and all the different diseases worldwide, the WHO, and everybody is meanwhile using this database, which is not the database of this institute, it's the database of the world's epidemiologists. There are hundreds, thousands of epidemiologists that contribute to that database, and therefore it's so good because it allows comparability between one country and the other. And if we look at this, we have, for example, in the EU 28, we have 512 million people. The prevalence of neurologic diseases is 307 million, which means that we have almost 60% of the European population suffering from a neurologic disease. Annually, and we have analyzed the year 2017. Annually, we have 1 million, more than 1 million deaths. And we have 21 million DELIs. What is DELIs? Let me explain that. DELIs are disability adjusted life years, and it's a composite measure that epidemiologists use to indicate the loss of quality of life for those who survive diseases, and it's also including the years lost to disease, so the premature death. And the composite of all this, and in that sense, it's a very good measure of the burden of disease. We have 21 million DALIs in the European Union. How does this compare to other disease groups? Here, the WHO and also the Global Burden of Disease database compares neoplasms, cancer, cardiovascular disease, which is all kind of cardiovascular disease except for stroke, neurological disease, musculoskeletal disease, for example, and so on. And if you compare that regarding the DALIs, then neurological disorders are third in terms of the number of DALIs that they cause. And the differences are between 18% of the total DALIs for neoplasms and 13% for neurological disorders. So the differences are there, but they are not that dramatic. So these three disease groups indeed cover most of the DALIs. So finally, the prevalence, it's very similar. We are number 3 in terms of death. This is again neoplasms, cardiovascular disease, and then neurological disorders in terms of death. Overall, it shows that we really do have neurological diseases have a major role when it comes to the total composition of disease burden in the world, and particularly in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I guess that in Europe we may not have, let's say, a very harmonious picture. There must be differences between different countries, or even different sub-regions of Europe. Did you notice anything like that?
Oh yes, absolutely. You're completely right. There are big differences. When you look, for example, what we have been analyzing are the 3 sub-regions: Western Europe, Central Europe and Eastern Europe. And in addition, we looked at the EU 28, so the European Union. The European Union is not exactly Western Europe, but it contains most of the Western European countries. Therefore, I just look now at Eastern, Central, and Western Europe. And when you look at this, you can see that, for example, stroke is the largest contributor, and we have 35% of the DALYs are due to stroke. For Central Europe, it's 28%, and for Eastern for Western Europe, it's 28%. For Central Europe, stroke is 55% of the DALYs, and Eastern Europe, it's even 62% of the DALYs that are due to stroke. When it comes to Alzheimer's disease, in Western Europe, we have a higher percentage than in Central and in Eastern Europe. It's 28% in Western Europe and only 12% in Eastern Europe. And finally, the third biggest contributor to the DALYs are the headaches, which is roughly for Western Europe, it's 22% and 13% each for Central and Eastern Europe. So there are big differences between the different parts of Europe, and that contributes certainly to the needs that we have. And that is something that creates a lot of discussions in our society, how we should best follow the needs in these different parts of Europe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the figures that you just mentioned are quite striking, and obviously we keep this saying of you need to measure what you want to address. So you mentioned that ranking third in terms of mortality and DALYs, but I believe that if we aggregate this for all brain conditions, including mental and psychiatric disorders, we can by far claim that we would be number one. But in the past, we had that saying from previous figures that it was in the range of 1 in 3 or slightly more than 1 in 3 Europeans were living with a brain condition. Where is the change why it is not changing, and where are those new figures coming from?
Very good point, Fred. Thank you for this question. First of all, if we add neurological disorders and mental disorders in the way how the WHO and the Burden of Disease study does, then it's indeed, as you say, then we are the largest group. Brain diseases are the largest group in terms of DALYs together, because mental disorders is more than 6%, neurological disorders more than 13%, and that's more than neoplasms, which are 18%. So these are the numbers. Okay, but why is this that we have now different numbers? Well, this is in principle a very simple thing. The diseases are allocated to the different disciplines in a way that is different to the reality. For example, stroke, as one of the main neurological diseases, has been allocated to cardiovascular diseases, which is internal medicine, which is cardiology, more or less. That has been the case until the ICD-10, which was the classification of diseases of the WHO until a year ago about, and that has been changed now in the ICD-11, because certainly stroke is a neurological disease. It's taken care of by neurologists worldwide, and there are specific specific treatment schedules that are done in the stroke units, and these are parts of neurological departments. And that was one of the really major things. We still see papers coming up classifying stroke among the cardiovascular diseases. That still happens, but it's no longer correct, and that has made part of the changes. The other thing is that that dementia has been classified under psychiatry alone. Now it's classified under neurology and psychiatry, and this is certainly also a major part of patients worldwide, and it's the neurodegenerative diseases are the fastest increasing diseases in the world, due to many causes. And what is very clear, this change came really because of the new allocation of diseases to the different disciplines of medicine.
Yeah, and I guess the point that you just made in the fact that we still see publications be not really reflecting the ICD-11, but still, or sometimes with another peculiar classification, is probably going to require time. I guess that in our space, in the brain space, we will also need to find an alignment with the other families of disciplines, particularly in psychiatry. What is the way ahead in your view, particularly in the frame of I should say the disciplines represented within EBC?
Well, I mean, this is a family of physicians that work together every day in the clinics worldwide. I mean, the neurosurgeon, the neuroradiologists, they are very close to us. Psychiatry is a discipline that depends a little bit on the region, but in many places in the world, psychiatrists and neurologists are very close together, work very close together, and certainly, I mean, this is why we have EBC. We have EBC because there is this unifying organ, the brain, that is really taken care of by these different disciplines of medicine. And certainly we have to work together to really make the politicians and the world understanding how important this is. And stroke on the one hand, schizophrenia at the other hand, or depression, these are diseases that really take much more attention by the politicians. They share a number of issues still today. Stigma, for example, is something that is present for all these diseases, and we really have very many common topics with these disciplines that we are just talking about. And EBC is in Europe the organization that will really unite these efforts to some extent.
Yeah, definitely, and I can only repeat the ongoing commitments that EBC is pledging on a continued basis in order to, well, assist member organizations, member societies to address the burden as you rightfully explained earlier on. I just would like to come back on what you were saying in the beginning, in the introduction, about EAN and the thousands of neurologists that actually are being represented by the society. Well, obviously, this is the workforce that is going to address the burden, is actually tackling the situation that you described earlier. Do you have any insights on how organized it is, how well equipped and resourced neurologists in Europe are as we speak?
Well, this is one of the weaknesses that we have in the field. We have big differences between different countries in terms of neurologists. On average, we know from our societies, we have the kind of data we have is that we asked all our societies, we have 47 member societies in the EAN, and they certainly know about their country, about the number of their members, but also the number of neurologists. We have asked them for the number of neurologists, and we have looked at the number of patients per neurologists. On average, this is almost 10,000, 9,250 in Europe, which is an enormous number that no neurologist can deal with. Absolutely impossible. Which means that most of the neurological patients still nowadays are not taken care of by neurologists. But it gets even worse. There are countries where one neurologist looks at more than 40,000 patients. So 40,000 patients per neurologist. But on the other hand, we have countries which have a very good support by neurologists, where the relation is around 1,000, which is then in the realistic range. And that's one of the weaknesses that we have to deal with in the next 2 decades to really improve that. We need more neurologists, we need to educate more neurologists, and we need to convince people that politicians, that they need to invest more into that field for healthcare and for research. That is, this is the other point. I mean, on the one hand, we have to take care of the patients, but on the other hand, it's also that we really need research, and the quality and the amount of research is also depending on the number of people that are doing this. And we need not only to educate physicians, we need to educate researchers, translational researchers, people who are interested in clinical research in the field, and that has been the big success of stroke. In the field of stroke, we have made a big change. For example, the DALYs for each patient that suffers from a stroke has been, and that can be nicely shown, has been dramatically decreased over the past 25 years. And one of the reasons why that is the case is really that we have stroke units where patients are treated at a very high level, and where all these new interventions that are meanwhile available to treat stroke can be applied. And similar success is to be expected for the treatment of inflammatory disease like multiple sclerosis, for epilepsies, for neurodegenerative diseases, once we really establish enough research in the field.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, you mentioned educating the neurologists, the medical profession, researchers. I think there is another category that you mentioned earlier, politicians, that probably also need to be educated, so to speak, on all these dimensions that you highlighted. Maybe to finish, because we are getting near to the end of our recording today. Just a final question on that vein, and maybe to finish on a positive note as well. Do you see, let's say, hope, I should say, or do you see opportunities in how to actually tackle the burden of disease and how to make it decrease?
Well, I mean, I think there's hope in many ways. On the one hand, there are now serious attempts in the WHO to make brain diseases the third NCD, non-communicable disease, which is really timely and which we need as an overarching political statement. On the other hand, it's the progress that can be seen for neurology and brain diseases in general is really that we move forward every year. We have so much successes in all fields of neurology. We are very pleased about this. You know, we have treatments meanwhile for motor neuron diseases. We have much better treatment for stroke. We have better treatments for Parkinson's disease. And that is really very satisfying how this is moving forward. Also, for very new diseases like COVID, I mean, the EAN has been able to construct a first guideline for the treatment of COVID even in 2020. We have been very fast in teaching our neurologists what you do best against this disease, because COVID is certainly a main target of COVID is the brain, and we see number of acute and chronic diseases of the brain following the COVID disease. That is something that really gives hope that we are much better able to treat all our diseases, and even implementing these different treatments is on a good way. For example, together with the EBC, we have looked at many neurologic diseases, large neurologic diseases, in the value of treatment project of EBC. And these series of papers is outlining approaches to better treat the different neurologic diseases on a population basis. So you can really apply these interventions that are proposed there and try to adapt it to specific health systems in the different countries.
Thank you very much, Günther. I think it's about time now to close our discussion of today. I would like to thank you very much for this eye-opening discussion and really demonstrating just how urgent it is becoming to address the under-recognized burden of neurological conditions. For further information, I'd like to invite our audience to visit the Brain Innovation Days website on braininnovationdays.eu, where we host not only this podcast, but many other pieces of information and publications or material, such as the ones discussed today. So thank you again, Professor Deuschl, for joining us today. To our listeners, thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more Brain Talks with speakers from our latest event, including the pitch competition winners. Thank you very much, and goodbye.